All right. Hello, Facebook and Impact Church, and all of those who may be joining us today. Welcome to a special Zoom call and a little addition here. We wanted to take just a moment and talk with you about finances and this current COVID-19 crisis. And so we're super excited to have this platform, the ability to do this. And so just as people are logging on, I wanted to just introduce myself and then introduce my friend who's here with us today. And we'll just kind of talk through some different things. And so as you're joining, maybe you could also share this video. So what this is, we're going to be talking today about finances and COVID-19. And I know that that's something, an area that finances that people, worry about anyway. So I know that's an area that people are concerned about, even when there's not an international pandemic. And so now there is an international pandemic, and people are even more cautious, worried, nervous about their finances, and so we are called as followers of Jesus not to shrink back and not to be scared or fear. But I know that's really hard when you look at some of the numbers, or if you've lost your job or something like that. So no matter where you find yourself, whether you have a lot of money and you're just looking for ways to be generous, or maybe you have been furloughed or laid off or temporarily laid off or lost your job, or even other bills or sicknesses have happened. We just want to be able to offer some biblical guidance for you, and some help as to what the Bible has to say about what we can do. So I want to encourage you guys, if you're logging on, I know we have a few people on that are watching us right now. Let us know where you're watching and how you're watching, and we'd love to interact with you. So we'll also do some Q&As. So if you want to type in any questions you have about finances or anything like that, of any concerns you have, no matter how specific they may be to you, feel free to type those out, and we'll try to get to some of those questions as we go. And you guys can help share this video as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce you guys to my friend and one of my pastors. His name is Pastor Bob Smith. Bob, I want you to just kind of introduce yourself. And I know you're kind of wearing two hats. So you've got your pastor hat and your financial advisor hat. And so why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction, Brandon. And yeah, I'm Bob Smith. I'm a 25-year financial advisor, and it seems to go very well with my second job as executive pastor at a local church. So the concept of stewardship is universal, and we see it throughout life. So I get to actually help people steward money, which is a church word, which means manage money, help manage money to the glory of God. So I will try to temper my answers here as to what are financial answers from a secular perspective, and then at times I'll compare and contrast that from a biblical perspective. So like I mentioned, I've been practicing for 25 years. I'm married to the lovely Lisa, and we have raised 5 children, 4 of which successfully.
I love the disclaimer there. Yeah, I think we can see your better half behind you.
Right there.
Yeah. So that's awesome.
That's my best girlfriend right there.
Yeah, that's the girl. So thank you so much for that. And I know you tend to take things from a very biblical perspective. So we're going to ask some practical questions, but maybe you can also just kind of let us know what we can expect from some of these questions we're going to be talking about. We're going to have about a 30-minute conversation here about finances and how to manage them during this crisis. But maybe give us, I know you have a little disclaimer that you need to say, that First Commands lawyers like for you to say, but maybe you could also give us your spiritual disclaimer as well of how you handle finances.
Sure. Let me start with the spiritual disclaimer first. back in 2007, my wife Lisa and I committed ourselves to become biblical stewards, we used the Bible as our primary resource on handling money, and we actually retooled our practice to have a biblical perspective. So that doesn't necessarily mean I'm working with only Christians, but what it means is I have a standard set of advice that comes directly from the owner's manual, and it allows me to standardize my advice to be honoring to God, whether or not the client, that's their intent or not, that's the advice they get. So that's kind of my spiritual disclaimer. From a financial perspective, in 2008, I became a certified financial planner. I do hold the CFP designation. I adhere to the certified financial planning standards and the board of standards. So I function as a fiduciary, which means the advice I'm about to give is generic and general in nature. It should not be construed as specific recommendations for any one person, but rather it should be seen as a construct for a discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. And that's some great context. And I want to set up a little more context. I know we've got a few more people that have come on. If you guys, we've never live streamed from Zoom before. And so if you guys can hear us and if the quality's okay, maybe if you could just say something, make a comment on the video, let us know that you're watching so we can make sure, since we haven't used this platform, make sure it works pretty well. I want to add a little more context because Bob can tell you all of that as a pastor, as a husband, as a financial advisor, but I can speak to it as his friend. And I can tell you that whenever I have conundrums, whenever I have things that, I need to know, not just financially, but about life, I go to Bob. And the reason I do is not because I think he's a lot smarter than me, although we both know that's true, but I go to him because he has a lot of wisdom. And I know that I'm going to get advice that comes from the Bible when I talk to him. And so that's something that just a little background. And I've watched it. Everything he's going to tell you tonight, I've watched him live it out. So I know stories of Bob and have seen Bob from when all sorts of phases of life. And I can just tell you that this is a guy who's going to give you some advice tonight, but he's the real deal. He's actually living out what he says. So Bob, thanks so much for that heart and for helping us out tonight. Okay. Maybe we'll just start here. COVID-19. Maybe you can just tell us when we're reopening and when this whole thing is going to be over with. And
sure.
No, tell us what's happening financially. So
God's calling.
God, yeah. Maybe you just tell us what's happening financially right now with COVID-19. I mean, obviously we hear that it impacts the markets and things, but for the average person, what should I care about how COVID-19 is affecting the financial structure?
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking the answer because that sets an overall picture of the environment that we find ourselves in. So literally what happened is in February, it's the first time in recorded history that a nation has chosen to suspend their economic engine. So we chose to stop our economic engine. And we did that for the purpose of being able to isolate and to protect from a virus that we had little understanding of. And rightfully so, it caused the right amount of fear initially so that we could energize ourselves. That's a reverse, but so that we could take action against an unknown. So when this first broke, I got to preach part of a message about, fear is the not knowing or deceiving danger. Well, we had danger and we didn't know what was happening. And so the government and the people complied with let's suspend the economic engine and stay home. And as we learn more about this virus, we'll be able to make decisions as to when and how we bring back the economy online. What that literally means is about 60% of the economy, by most estimates, is waiting to restart. Now, some things are running, your grocery stores running and CVS and the pharmacies are running and stuff like that. different schedules and different protocols, but about 60 or about 40% of the country is waiting to go back to work. We did an unprecedented stimulus package, and that we're literally paying people to not work right now. And we're doing that so that so we would comply with the government's desires for us to stay home. And this is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for the United States, in that pretty much the rest of the world is doing something very similar. What I anticipate from my research with 3 different economists is we anticipate different parts of the economy starting to come back at whatever level and whatever protocols that calls for, but starts to come back by 3rd quarter of this year. And if by the 4th quarter we have our economic engine started again, then the recession should only last for 2 quarters. And by this time next year, we should be back to where we started. And it'll look like a big, nasty dip. Now, what that looked like in the stock market was the stock market does not necessarily run off of financial information, but it runs off greed and fear. So if the market thinks that something's good going to happen, it goes up. And if they think something bad is going to happen, it goes down. And so we saw the single largest drop in one day in the stock market back a couple weeks ago. The general market, or the S&P 500, actually dropped 35% over a 2-day period. Wow. And that, by definition, anything below 20% is a correction. And if it stays below there for a quarter, it counts as a recession. So just some verbiage that you're going to hear thrown out there. And that's why if we get the economic engine coming back by the 4th quarter, we'll see the market rise. Now, we've seen a violent recovery. Actually, we've seen a robust recovery. Let me demonstrate. This is the stock market right now. And this was the high in January, a 35% drop. Now we've started this sharp recovery, where today, as of close of business today, the general market is only down 14.43%. So what that's telling me is the stock market has already costed in COVID, meaning we were afraid, we contracted, and now the people who have money in the stock market are saying, okay, this thing is going to figure itself out, and it's starting to bring some normalcy back. So that's a good sign, because the stock market tends to be an indicator of what's going to happen.
Wow, that's pretty good, man. Thanks for the chart too, because I learned some new words and learned some things. And I want you to go back and tell me again, though. And we've got some more people that have come in. I even saw our buddy Fitz joined us tonight to watch, and we've got Ashley and Nakia and have come on, and so you guys feel free. We are taking questions, so if you guys have any questions about the economy or finances, personal or broad, we'll be answering some questions as we go tonight. So just comment whatever questions you might have, or comments that you want Pastor Bob to address. You said something, the stock market is driven by, and you said 2 words. Could you just repeat that again?
What's driven by emotion, and the 2 emotions are greed and fear.
Yeah. So just to remember that those are often 2 emotions that drive all of us when we're talking about finances, right? Oh no, I'm scared. I need to use whatever money I have to buy toilet paper, and a lot of it, right? And so, or man, I need to make sure I'm taken care of, and so I need to make so those are 2 emotions that I think we're all familiar with. To help us understand the general economy. You also gave a stat, and I don't know if you remember it off the top of your head. You were talking about how much of the workforce is not working right now. Do you remember that statistic?
Yeah, we've got about 22 million people filing for unemployment, but the economic engine is about 40% offline right now. So there's a lot of things, and that's mostly in the service industries. Because if you think about it, no restaurants are open and no bars are open, and just stuff that we frequent routinely isn't open. And but about 40% of the economy is offline right now. So there's a disproportional unemployment to that. So yeah, it's a very real, it's not an emotion at this point. It's a very real fact.
No doubt. So I hear that I don't know. I mean, I would have to research that. I don't know if you know, but that seems like a historic number of the workforce not at work right now. And so as we do that, I know that some of that number includes people who've just been temporarily laid off. Well, we're hoping their jobs will return as the country opens back up. But let's just say someone's watching right now and they just lost their job. Or they fear that they're in danger of losing their job. What should they be doing right now? And I'm thinking financially, and if you have any life advice too, but what should those part of that 40%, what should they be doing right now?
Yeah. I don't know if you can say we're very fortunate right now, but because this is a health crisis and wasn't an economic crisis, at least not yet. There's a lot of aid available right now. So for small businesses, they got the PPP, which is a loan program. There's grants and loans, and then there was a stimulus given to some people, or given to quite a few people. And so the first thing, if you've lost your job, is you need to start checking and find out what's available to you. So let me mention that on a spiritual side. The Bible is clear that it wants people to work, and that we find purpose in work, and we find value in work, and we work so that we can be generous. And I'll get to that later. But this is a case where we're not working as not as a result of our own actions. And so it is absolutely proper for a nation of our wealth to be able to accept the social security net, not Social Security, but the secure net that our society can provide at this time. And I'm sure somebody will ask a question about, what's this doing to our long-term debt? But my short answer is there's a lot of benefits right now, and you need to avail yourself of that and take full advantage of it. And brother, do it with a clear conscience, because it is intended for this time and this place.
Yeah, that's a good word. And if you guys need any assistance in doing that, maybe you're watching and you don't know where to start. How do I file for unemployment? What do I do? We would love to help you with that. And feel free to just send us a message or comment on this, and I'll send your information over myself or Pastor Bob, and we'll make sure to point you in the right direction for that. Also, you mentioned, I just saw today where the president signed some more billions of dollars into the PPP program.
Yep.
So hopefully that'll help the small businesses who need it. Okay, so here's another question. We're all maybe a little tight, some people, and not sure, like you said, the long-term effects of this. How should we be altering our spending plan right now? And, should I be sitting down with my wife and looking over our numbers and saying, well, let's cut this. What should we be doing right now?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because I'm literally answering that 10 or 15 times a day. And it's not just an answer, but it's not academic. It's actually, we're doing this. So I'm doing this with my clients. I'm doing it with my own family. I'm doing it with people I'm mentoring and with people I love. So in general, a spending plan has three components to it. So it has your must pays at the top. So the three components are assets come into the spending plan, and then you have your must pays at top. So that's going to be your mortgages and your insurances and the stuff that if you don't pay them, there's pain. Mm-hmm. And then there's going to be actually before that should come your value system. So you should fund your value system. That means if you have an obligation to a family member, then if you're supporting a special needs individual, you should do that. Or if you're supporting a parent, you should do that. If you've made obligations to church, charity, families, You should do that. And then comes your must pays. And then what falls out at the bottom is discretionary. A well-constructed spending plan will have 30 to 40% discretionary spending left over at the end of the month. Now, in Northern Virginia, that number gets a little smaller because typically we spend 30 to 40% on mortgages or rent. But in that discretionary pot is where we should start looking for the first cuts. That's where you avoid the vacation. That's where you avoid some other things that you can put on hold until your conditions change.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of us, one of those, I mean, food is I would put that under necessity, but maybe, you know, the takeouts and the eating outs and, you know, all of those types of things would be, you know, another area to cut as well. And so here's another question, because you mentioned something under the second tier, you put values, and you said that it is appropriate to fund our values. In fact, it is the of second most importance after your needs are met. Then you go straight to
I turned those around. I did it by mistake. So it's disingenuous to not fund your values. And so you're lying to yourself if you say, you know, it's important to me to take care of my mom, but this month I'm not going to take care of her. Or it's important to me to give money to my church. Or it's important to me, if this is truly your value, then don't be disingenuous to yourself, because you've got to shave the next day. You got to look yourself in the mirror. So I did get those out of order, and that's by my mistake. But fund your values first. And then when you do that, your must pays. And then all the rest of it is discretionary. So yeah, you can change your eating habits. You can change your entertainment habits. You can change a lot of things. But if you're changing your values over money, then I would say you're lying to yourself.
Wow. So now you're starting to meddle a little bit. Okay. Yeah. Because now what you've done is said that how we treat our money shows us how we treat our soul and our heart.
Yeah, it's about your heart.
Yeah. So let me just ask you this, because under values, you mentioned taking care of family members, charities, but you also mentioned church and giving to your church. And so let me just ask, maybe someone has lost their job or has got their hours cut back or something, and they're needing to readjust their spending plan. First, what I hear you say is readjust your spending plan. So, you know, before you do anything else and decide what to cut, sit down and look. And then after you do that, I'm hearing you say continue to fund. What if someone out there would say, well, I'd like to, but, you know, honestly, I can't afford to give to the church right now, or I can't afford to give to some of my values. Do you have any, first of all, spiritual advice, but maybe any practical wisdom as well?
Yeah, and here's where the two actually come into intersection for me. And my first advice, or my first observation would be, let's get some phraseology correct. Is the Bible in the Old Testament talks about a tithe, and a tithe means 10% of what you make. Now in the New Testament, you're free to give way more than that. You can give more that or more. We're not restricted to a tithe. But what I wanted to point out was the Bible talks about that's a first fruit offering, which means it's what you've made. So if you're still working, you should still be giving your 10%. You should still be giving your tithe if that's your value system. Now, if you're not working, then there is no tithe necessarily, but now you're giving out of generosity. And what you're doing is you're funding your value system at that point. So one of them is a reflection of your, and then what you're doing is you're allowing your faith to grow. So when I read the Bible, I see very clearly that God's in charge of providing for me. And I am lying to myself. I'm misleading myself when I tell that I'm providing for myself. So at this point, you may not tithe because I'm going to have income coming in. But if you said you were going to support a missionary who's on the field right now, this is not the time to pull your support because, well, they need to live too. And so you got to continue. You got to continue funding your value system. The reason that's important is because you now made it God's problem. Is he now has to provide for the stuff you need because you were faithful and obedient with what he trusted you with. And when it comes to trusting, I'd rather trust God with my problem than having me try to figure it out.
Yeah, 100% of the time.
So I know that's a hard message to hear when things get tight, that you still want to fund the kingdom. But when you do that, your faith grows. And as your faith grows, it becomes God's problem to provide for you.
Wow. So then that also increases our prayer life and increases our overall trust and relationship with the Lord.
And from personal experience, I can tell it draws you closer to your spouse because you're more intimate in the day-to-day decisions and you agree upon your value system.
Wow, that's so good. And I would say, if you guys are watching and you're wondering, man, maybe we can't get on the same page about money or, whatever, please reach out to us. We would love to help offer some insights or some counseling or whatever, some tools that may be of help to you guys. So, okay. So while we're on the topic of church giving, I've got some other general questions, but since we're on the topic of church giving, why don't you, I get this a lot as a pastor and I know you do too, but let's say right now I do want to give to my church. But I want to give to something specific. Like, I've only got this much money and I am going to give, but I want to make sure that the money I give goes straight to the benevolence fund or goes straight to feeding the hungry or helping others during this time. Is that okay?
Well, first, I would say I appreciate your heart. The heart of a believer is somebody who recognizes they've been forgiven and that the only debt they have is the debt they have to Christ, and that compels us to be generous. We're not generous because we're trying to be like the Pharisees that threw more money into the pot so they could be noticed. We're generous because we've been given so much. How can we not give? So first, I would applaud your generosity. If you're concerned about benevolence funds or given to the adoption fund or given to the feed the children's fund or to an orphanage, something like that, I love your heart. Now, what I would say to you is give the money, but let the local church decide where it goes. What is your priority may not be exactly, now your heart's priority is good to give, but the local church has a mandate to meet many different demands and many different needs. So where you might want to give to the benevolence fund, we actually may want to give to an orphanage at that time. And that's not because that's our pet project, because that's where the collection of the Spirit-led church has said that's where God wants his resources to go. So rather than to be alone and dictate where you want God's money, put it in God's bank account and then let God dictate where it goes.
Man, I love that. I love that. Yeah. And so, and I would add too, if you are part of a local church that you don't trust what they do and allocate, that's a conversation you need to have with your church's leadership, instead of just taking it upon yourself. And then if it goes from there, that's a conversation you and the Lord need to have. But I think that's really good, sound wisdom, biblical wisdom. So I've gotten this question a lot, especially this past week. It's kind of this: do I tithe off of my stimulus money? So our family was super blessed. Like, I think the first day that the money came available, it hit our bank account, and we were super blessed by that. And I've heard others, and I don't know, maybe you comment, if you still haven't gotten yours, maybe the IRS is watching, and they can help. But I know some people are waiting and some people have gotten theirs already. And a question that I've gotten this week is, do I need to tithe off of that money? Because I didn't earn it, right? So what's your answer to that?
Yeah, my answer is yes. And the reason being is you did earn it. You've been paid it to not work. So you just swapped one income for another income. And yeah, you did not go out by the sweat of your brow and earn it, but we are literally being compliant with the desires of the government for this season we're in. And because of that, they paid you. In addition to that, why wouldn't we? We're generous people. And so I would want to tithe off that and be generous with that, because, well, I want God to continue to bless me too. So regardless of how God chooses to bless me, I'll celebrate it. Regardless of how God chooses to pay you, you should celebrate it.
Awesome. So, yeah, and I would second that too. I think that's one of the first things that my family we did with ours, because what else? Like you said, we want the blessing of that, but we also want to further God's kingdom with that. Amen. So, but that kind of a follow-up question too is, I know there's some people who are getting the stimulus check and they haven't lost their job and they're already living pretty comfortably. What would you say to those who would say, well, I don't really need this, so what should I do with it? Should I go ahead and book a cruise in 2025 when they're back open? What should I do with that?
Yeah. Talk about queuing yourself up to be generous. It's a time and a place right now where the aroma of Christ is going to be so magnified to the generosity of his people. So if your cup is crushed down and overflowing and the blessings are flowing out of that, then now's the time to put on the aroma of Christ. Now's the time to demonstrate your faith. It's not the time to hoard. It's not the time to self-indulge, but it's the time to realize that God entrusted you with an extra amount of money, not because he wants you to enjoy it, which he does, but because he wants you to be generous. And talk about a time that's ripe for people who need to see the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. So that's not really the CFP answer. That's more the answer from the heart. Yeah. What conventional financial planning would tell you is to bank it and wait to see what happens on a rainy day. What a man of faith would tell you is invest it in the kingdom and don't worry about the rainy day. God has your umbrella.
Amen. Amen. Oh, I love that. It sounds good. I know that's hard. Yeah, especially if that's not your normal way of doing things. That can be hard. And so, but with faith, I think we can do that. Okay, I'm just kind of getting down to my last couple of questions here. These are just kind of questions that I've gotten over the last several weeks, and I wanted to ask you, and which, by the way, you guys are kind of privy. These are conversations that Bob and I have all the time, except he's usually much more blunt with me and not quite as nice when I mess up. Yeah. So this is kind of the elephant in the room, I think. What if I need help financially? But I'm too afraid to ask. I feel like I would lose my dignity. I feel like even with the unemployment I'm getting from the government, it's still not enough, especially in a place like Northern Virginia, where cost of living is so extreme. What would you say to someone who may have some pride, dignity? I don't even mean pride in a bad way, but they just have some dignity about them. This is the first time they've ever been in this type of situation, and they do need help. And maybe it's to pay rent or a car note, or maybe it's something really small, like just some groceries. What would you say to them if they're listening right now and they know they need some help, but they're too afraid to ask?
Yeah. What I would say is you're afraid of the wrong things. Our pride, since the fall of mankind in Genesis chapter 3, has our pride tricking us into that we can do things alone. And I'm guilty of that. My pride stands in the way of me being able to do a lot of things with the help of others. And I'm learning to do that. But this is not a confession time, but what this is don't let your fear, which is actually your pride, stand in the way. Matter of fact, Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before the destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. what I would say is you're not intended to carry this alone. God didn't wire you to do that. That's the other side. That's the other argument. That's either your flesh or the evil one telling you that you can stand on your own. We were never created that way. Since the time of Adam, who was created and he saw the other animals and not a suitable helper was noticed, that God then created a suitable helper for him, one that he could spend, that we're not designed to do this by ourselves. And so the minute, or as soon as we come to that realization that community is designed to not just be a social event, but to be an event that carries one another, then you are free to say, I can't do this by myself because I'm not designed for this. God did not design you to do it by yourself. You cannot save yourself. You cannot make yourself better. And everything about this walk on this planet, it was designed for you to be done through Jesus Christ and with the help of people who love you and will support you. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, amen. And I just want to say too, and Bob, thanks for bringing us just to scripture on that. And I want to say, if you are in need, if you need something financially right now, please reach out to us. Send us a private message or comment on here. We would love to be able to help or point you in a right direction to make sure you get help during this time. Well, brother, this has been so good. I got one more question. And as I tee you up, if you guys have any questions, Bob, sometimes asking questions about finances is a little intimidating because you don't want to be seen as, somebody who has a lot of money or doesn't have a lot of money, or you don't want to be judged. So if you guys have questions, feel free to comment them. I'm looking through and we'll ask Bob those questions if you have any. But this is my last question. And then if you guys have any questions, you guys can tune in. But I know we even have a couple watching tonight of church leaders, other people who lead in a church. I know as pastors, we frequently see other peers and church leaders. And I know even you and I have talked about just how drastically things are changing right now and how quickly, and it's hard to keep up as a church leader. So what piece of advice would you give as a pastor, as a financial advisor, as a practitioner of this? What advice would you give to church leaders who are trying to lead their churches through this financially right now?
Yeah, that's a great question because this comes up quite a bit. The advice I have for church leaders is don't be afraid of this. Money is a 5-letter word. And so my mama taught me that there's a lot of 4-letter words I can't use in mixed company, but money has 5 letters. Money is talked about in the Bible more than any other single topic, with the exception of the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. So we can't be afraid of it. So leadership, just because it's uncomfortable, doesn't stop. So what I would say to church leaders is you can't be afraid. And that means that your weaknesses are going to be exposed too. Mm-hmm. And I'm not perfect, and Pastor Brandon's not perfect, but we know who is. That's right. And together we can discover what to do. So what I'm telling church leaders to do is, this is a topic that a lot of us don't want to get into because, one, we're not convinced that we have it right. And 2, we don't want to pry in an area that is very emotional to our congregation. Well, it's in the Bible. It means it belongs on the playing field. And that means we get to bring light to it. But the biggest thing I see is we can't be afraid of this. We got to step into it. And the metaphor that I've heard you use is the shepherd needs to smell like the sheep. We should be with the sheep. We should be with our people, walking hand in hand on how to do this. So that's what I tell church leaders is, just because you don't have it right doesn't mean that you can't figure out how to walk with somebody to follow the one who knows how to do it.
That's right. Yeah, so good. So what I hear you say is don't shy away.
Yep.
Address it head on, and be aware of your own shortcomings and insecurities as you do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, man, it's so good. Well, Bob, thanks for having this conversation. I know there's a lot of different avenues that we could have gone to talk through this, and a lot of different things. We just kind of wanted to get the conversation started and let you know, if you're watching this, that you are not alone, that we are with you, that Jesus is with you. And if you don't have Jesus, that you're missing out on life's security. And your security, these moments show us, is not in our bank account or our 401ks. Our security really is found in a relationship with Jesus. And so we just want to get this conversation started. Maybe we'll do this again if there's interest. Maybe we'll field some more questions. Bob, before I let you go, is there anything else, any other words of encouragement or any questions we didn't get to you feel like are important, or I'll give you the last word tonight?
Yeah, and I just want to wrap up on something that you had brought back around. When we talked about being in financial need and how we're not designed, or when I talked about we're not designed to do life alone, that is not just a platitude. It's not a bumper sticker. And the local church was designed to be that body that we go to. Now, if you're not part of a local church, or if you haven't figured out yet what church is, that doesn't exclude you. You see, you are part of the humanity that God came to save. So you don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to go to a local body. And all that means is somebody who belongs to a church. And you go to them and say, I need help. And I know for a fact, every member of Impact Church knows who to call when somebody needs help. They call their community group leaders, they call their pastors, we know who to call. So just because you're not in our community doesn't mean you can't be invited in. And just because you don't have it figured out doesn't mean you can't get help. The church was designed for this time, for this purpose.
Right. Amen, brother. Well, thank you. And thank you guys so much. We've gotten some very nice comments here, Bob. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. And maybe if this has been helpful for you, please share it and help us get the word out. Again, we are trying to help people financially, but we want to make much of Jesus Christ. And that's what we're trying to do during this time. And finances is a way that we can do that. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you have questions, if you would like further counsel in this issue, I'd be more than happy. I know Bob would as well, or like you said, we could connect you with the right person. And so want to just really encourage you guys with that. And thank you guys so much. So Bob, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your night. Sorry for keeping you in your office a little later on a Friday night.
That's okay.
All right, guys, keep living the dream. Thank you guys so much. And God bless you guys on this Friday night.